of the world's best young football talent is gathered in one spot in Indianapolis. The scouting combine's underway. The coaches are there. The evaluators are there. And all anybody in the sport's talking about today is the annual NFLPA survey. Good afternoon to you. Good Wednesday afternoon. I'm Dejan Kovacevic of DK Pittsburgh Sports. This is the new Double Shot Show, and this is my annual attempt at kind of raining all over this survey because it unto itself is all over the place. Are there things in there that are worth paying attention to? Yes, absolutely. Are there things in there specifically that should be of concern to the local team? Yes, undeniably. But when you're getting into some of the stuff that, well, we're being honest here, that everybody's actually talking about, maybe not so much. I'm going to start with the one that everybody's talking about, and that, of course, would be Art Rooney getting a D grade from his players and ranking 28th out of 32 owners in that regard. Not at all a good look. I'm not mocking that. It's just not. Of the 5 grades that are at least indirectly related to ownership, the actual grade for ownership was a D. Treatment of families was a C-. The locker room, and they're talking mostly, by the way, about the locker room that's on the south side as opposed to the one at Acrisure Stadium. It's where they spend the most of their time, is a D. Training room is a C+. Weight room is a C+. And that's not good. I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, that's the players are ridiculous. They don't know what they're talking about. If they express that, that comes with relevance. But I am also here to tell you that when I talk to these players, that they have one concern above all else. And that's that one that I read to you near the beginning. That was treatment of families. They want, when these games happen, not practices, not anything else, when the games happen, home games at Acrisure Stadium, they want their families to be treated basically like royalty. They want to have an easy time getting them set up. They want to have an easy time with tickets, and they hear from their families. That's who they're around. Why are we not getting this? Well, I heard from so-and-so with the Ravens or the Cardinals or whoever that they get treated like this. Why don't we? I have been told that unequivocally that that's the biggest thing out of all this. Does that mean the rest of it's nothing? No. I specifically have concerns. If you want to circle one thing out of this survey that to me hits the hardest, and this isn't going to be stuff people talk about, but that's that their strength and conditioning coaches, that their weight room sunk dramatically from last year, meaning 2023, to the 2024 season. And that was with the new employment of Phil Matus as strength and conditioning coordinator. That's problematic. That's really problematic. Because if these players felt that there was some kind of issue in that room or with how they can prepare for games or some of the things that they're asked to do, that has to be looked at. I don't even know that that's an ownership issue. Okay. I think that's something that has to be looked at by Mike Tomlin first and foremost. And you have to get that straightened out. Even if it's just a miscommunication, even if it's just the players being personally mad or something like that, you have to get it straightened out. That matters. That matters. But let me tell you how this broader dialogue is going to go, if it hasn't already. People are going to say, look at Rooney. See, we told you he stinks. He's no good. He doesn't care. They're going to be saying that, most of them, from a standpoint of, he didn't fire Mike Tomlin. We don't like Rooney because he didn't fire Tomlin. We don't like Rooney because there was no real accountability after the season, chiefly that he didn't fire Tomlin. Okay, but guess what the Steelers' highest grade was? That's right, head coach. Tomlin got an A. He got one of the very highest rankings from his own players anywhere in the NFL. So if you believe, you know where I'm going with this, right? if you believe that the players have cause to really think that Rooney's not any good, then you also think Tomlin's awesome, right? Right? I mean, you can't just cherry pick on these things. I don't take them too seriously. I deal with players all the time in all sports. I would look at things that affect or potentially affect performance. I've spent a lot of time in the Steelers practice facility. I've spent a lot of time since the place opened at Acrisure Stadium. There is not much difference between their facility and the other ones that I've been in, including practice facilities. There just isn't. There isn't, how do I put this? There isn't exactly an overwhelming amount of, bells and whistles and fancy stuff. They do some things that are kind of neat from that standpoint, but it's a lot like the Rooneys themselves. It stays pretty basic, pretty bland. I think when I think of the Rooneys and who they are, I think of them leaving that awful white tent up outside Acrisure Stadium along the river for almost 20 years when they could have just actually built something. They are not inherently big, lavish spenders, look at me, gold chains, whatever else, okay? They're just not. And they're not going to be. And I don't think that's generational, because all of this applied, everything I'm describing here, when Dan Rooney was running the show. In fact, those tents were there all through Dan's tenure. So I don't necessarily, get into that kind of stuff. I'm looking much, much, much more at what it is that affects player performance, what it is that can affect what we see out on the field. That needs to get fixed. The rest of this, hey, I'm just going to accept this as you loving Tomlin as the head coach. All right. When we come back, I'm going to be joined by Chris Halleck out in Indianapolis.
At DK Pittsburgh Sports, we take pride in coverage that connects our city's fans to their favorite teams. Now, that connection's stronger than ever. Introducing our all-new state-of-the-art app. Find expert inside reporting and original podcasts. Check live box scores. Track the latest stats. Chat it up with our community of thousands of fans, all in one place. The new app from DK Pittsburgh Sports. Coverage that connects.
Joined now, as promised, by Chris out in Indianapolis at the NFL Scouting Combine. Chris, all anybody talked about in advance of this combine is all anybody's going to talk about after this combine, which is the defensive linemen. Yeah. You got to spend some time with those guys today. Just do this, okay? You've just walked into the Steelers' crappy, dilapidated scouting room over on the south side. And I'm sure it's crappy and dilapidated, right? And you're in there, and we're all sitting there drinking from Dixie cups with holes in the bottom of them in these dilapidated, terrible facilities. And your job is to sell us on taking a defensive lineman. Go get it.
Well, I think selling point number one is the fact that in the last time this football team actually played a game, they gave up 299 rushing yards. That's a major no-no, especially when you look at Steelers history and the fact that, Ben Roethlisberger recently talked about this on his own podcast, that players used to get mad, like legitimately mad, if they gave up 100 yards rushing in a game, much less almost 300 yards. So that's selling point number one. They have to get better at in the trenches there. I mean, it's not that, Cam Hayward can't play anymore. He was an all-pro for a reason. But when you look at the rest of that room, and the fact that Cam Hayward how many years does he have left? Like, I understand he just had an all-pro season, but like, they didn't do this with Ben, right? When he was in his last few years, they didn't draft a guy and develop him so that whenever when he rode off into the sunset, they had somebody waiting in the wings for him. They didn't do that. They need to do that with Cam Hayward. They need to do that. They need to have a guy who's already there, already established, ready to go. And in the meantime, maybe he just happens to be the next Stephon Tuitt. Just maybe. I don't know. So they need to get a guy, and there are some good options in this class.
Well, give me one.
So Kenneth Grant spoke today. Now, I'm a little hesitant to want to try to sell a first-round pick on a nose tackle. But this is no ordinary nose tackle, okay? He played at 345 pounds last year, and he's like 6'3", I think. I don't remember his exact height, but he was like he's not Daniel McCullers, for everybody who remembers him, the big old teddy bear that played in. Yeah, he's not that guy. But if anybody remembers a game between Michigan and Penn State, he ran down Katron Allen. Katron Allen, if he would have declared for the draft, he would have been he probably would have been a day 2 running back in this class, a very, very loaded class. He ran down Katron Allen downfield. He can run. He's aiming to actually run a 4.8 or a 4.9 in the 40. And this is a nose tackle. This dude can move. He is athletic. He can play multiple spots up front. He's not just a zero guy who lines up over the center every single time. He can play. He can move a little bit to the outside. So when you talk about the Steelers having those 2 down linemen, he can be one of those guys if need be.
If he is that guy, then you'd better be sure about something else. And that's that you were, well, no, let me rephrase that we were correct in suggesting that you have miscast Keanu Benton. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
Because Keanu can do a lot more than what he's being allowed to do by the Steelers. They seem to have this idea that he needs to be that zero guy. And I don't know that he does. You know, his greatest strength coming out of college is the greatest strength that he's shown when he's allowed to do it in Pittsburgh, which is to go get the quarterback, get into the backfield. And he doesn't do that here. They have him plugging and, freeing up Larry Ogunjobi. Like, no, So I think that when you look at this, I keep coming back to the same name, and I don't care how unfair this is, because when you're talking first round, you have to be thinking big. You have to be thinking, at a really high level here. And I want to see, if it's not necessarily the next Cam Hayward, that's a ridiculous bar. Okay?
Yes.
Get me the next Stephon Tuitt. Not that Steph wasn't special unto himself, okay? But someone who is in that mold, who can be a game wrecker, who can get into the backfield, but also, Chris, just stop the run through sheer happenstance. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, just be good enough that you go, oh, it's a run. Oh, these are easy. And you bring the guy down. Whereas the special stuff is the reason that you draft him. I don't want to draft a run stopper.
Yeah, well, and that would be, Kenneth Grant is definitely known more to be a run stopper. And when you play nose tackle, that's
345, yeah.
Right. So, and he has slimmed down a bit. He says he's down to like 330 something now. So he's slimmed down a little bit because he wants to be more athletic, and he wants to prove that he can also rush the passer as well, on top of what he can do in stopping the run. But when you're talking about a guy who kind of fits that 3-4 defensive end role, what Cam Hayward can do, what Stephon Tuitt used to be able to do, Walter Nolan's probably the best guy that you're, at least in the Steelers' range. Now, I'm not convinced that Walter Nolan is going to be there at 21 overall. I actually think he's going to be gone by that point, but there are some people that still kind of believe that it's a possibility. And so if he does happen to be there, that's your guy when you're talking about that 3-4 defensive end, when you have 3 down.
Who is he? Give us something.
So
Where's he from? What's he do?
He's from Ole Miss.
Okay.
He's a typical, like in the Steelers scheme, he'd be one of those 2 defensive linemen on the interior. When they're in their 3-4, he'd be in that traditional 3-4 defensive end role. He's very, very, his get off, whenever we're talking about the ball is snapped, he's already way up out of his stance, already making contact. His get off it might be the best in the class. Like, I'm being serious. That was the thing that really stood out to me, because he was at the Senior Bowl. That was the thing that stood out to me whenever I watched him there. I'm like, this dude moves differently than anybody else here. And so that, to me, you're talking about athleticism, you're talking about twitchy, you're talking about really quick, and also kind of, like, dare I say, violent. That's what you're looking at with Walter Nolan. I have some digging to do on this. There's some character issues there a little bit, nothing major, but anytime you start talking about character issues, you have to, I need to talk to more people before I can truly report on that. That's more speculation and conjecture right now, just kind of scuttlebutt I'm hearing right now. So I need to do some more digging on that.
I kind of like my defensive linemen to have character issues. Anyway, that's just a personal preference. When we come back, J1Q.
safety is a habit. Gun safety and responsible storage are no different. Help prevent gun accidents, misuse, and theft. Keep firearms safe and secure when not in use. For safe storage options, visit projectchildsafe.org.
You know, before we get to J1Q today, sometimes I think about these things during the break. I'm reminding myself that I forgot to bring up which team sunk the lowest in the NFLPA survey this year. Like, which team had the biggest drop, the ugliest fall off from year to year? You ready? That's right. Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. Massive drop, just across the board. Poor Eagles. How will they ever get where it is that they need to go? Let's go now to the center of the state here for today's J1Q.
Jim in Ridgeway again. I was just wondering one question. How different would the Steelers season have looked, and how would it look going forward if they would have not only kept Brian Flores, but promoted him to defensive coordinator and took that away from Tomlin, giving him the full power to run the defense?
You know, Jimmy, the thing that makes this complicated is that if you ever did something like that, you'd tacitly be firing Tomlin. And while I know that there's, a significant portion of the fan base that would be okay with that, you might as well just go ahead and do the whole thing in that event. You might as well just say, listen, Flores is going to be our head coach. And that's because if you just look at their defenses, if you look at the standard Tomlin defense, you look at the standard Flores defense, they don't have much in common. They really don't. That's why when Flores was brought here, and it had obviously all kinds of other circumstances attached to it with the lawsuit, National Football League, everything that happened in Miami, he was brought in basically a supporting / advisory role. He wasn't doing specific things. He wasn't in charge of this or in charge of that. As such, that was going to work just fine, and by every accounting, it did. When I look at what's happened since then, Flores goes to Minneapolis, does really well with the Vikings, as everybody probably knew that he would. And the Pittsburgh defense, they had their 10-3, and things started getting picked apart in Cleveland, and the rest of that story. I don't know how this could have happened, what you're describing. I just don't. I know it sounds neat, and it sounds like, listen, here's what's happening. Every subject, let's just call this for what it is, okay? Every subject that comes up right now related to this football team, whether it's the NFLPA survey, whether it's the question that you just asked, whether it's anything at all to do with the Steelers, it gets shot down right now because everyone wants the coach gone. Not everyone. A lot of people want the coach gone. I have spoken on this program that I would rather see the Steelers go a new direction at head coach, meaning fire Tomlin. I have written it. I did it from Baltimore when the season ended, that Tomlin should be gone. It's time for something new. But he's not going to be gone, okay? So thinking that this thing over here or that thing over there or maybe something else or this NFLPA survey in which he graded A is somehow some sort of roundabout way or roundabout criticism of Tomlin or having Tomlin employed. I'm going to say it again. You can't have it both ways. Which part of the survey do you accept? That Rooney is a lousy owner because he didn't fire Tomlin, or that Tomlin is a really great head coach? Because there's a canyon in between those two concepts. I appreciate you, Jimmy. I'm sorry for the lousy answer. I'm grateful for everybody who checks out the new Double Shot Show. We'll be back with another one of these tomorrow, including the latest from Chris Halleck out in Indianapolis.